It started with a fever. Not a normal fever, the kind that burned slow, deep in the bones, turning sweat to ice and breath to fire. The first cases appeared in a remote village at the edge of the Sahara, where the dunes swallowed entire histories without a trace. A farmer's son collapsed in the midday heat, convulsing in the sand. That night, his family woke to find him standing outside, staring at the sky, whispering in a language no one understood. Then it spread. By the time the first medical teams arrived, the village was silent. Not abandoned, silent. Doors stood open. Food sat untouched. The people were still there, but they did not speak, did not move. They only stared upward, mouths slightly open, as if waiting for something. When authorities sent in drones, they found the villagers gathered at the edge of a sinkhole that hadn't been there before, a perfect circle, carved into the desert floor, impossibly smooth. No footprints let in. None let out. But something had risen. And when the teams went down to investigate, their vitals spiked. Heart rates tripled. Oxygen levels plummeted. Their last transmissions before the feed went dead contained only a single phrase, whispered over and over in voices not entirely their own. "They are not us." The feed cut out at 3:42 Greenwich Mean Time. A full tactical response team was mobilized within the hour, but by the time they arrived, the village was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Houses stood empty. Footprints in the sand led to the sinkhole, but none returned. No bodies. No signs of a struggle. Just silence, stretching for miles, broken only by the howling wind. Agent Malik Samatar, on loan from a classified branch of Interpol, adjusted his earpiece as the ground team set up perimeter lights. They'd been briefed on route, unknown biological event, possible mass hysteria, minimal contamination risk. But he had been in the game long enough to recognize the gaps in a report. No evacuation footage. No eyewitnesses outside the original drone feed. And the satellite imagery? It showed something moving at the edge of the sinkhole, just before the transmission went dark. Malik checked his weapon. Whatever was down there, they weren't walking in blind. "Bravo team, fan out," the commander ordered. "We secure the perimeter first. No one goes underground until we have visual confirmation of." The ground lurched. A deep, resonant boom echoed from the sinkhole, followed by a gust of hot air that carried a scent Malik had smelled once before, in a morgue after an autopsy gone wrong. Not rot. Something older. Something preserved. The lights flickered. A low vibration crawled through the sand, making his teeth buzz. Then a voice crackled through the radio. "Malik?" He froze. The voice was distorted, warped by static. But he recognized it. His brother had died 3 years ago. And yet, through the interference, the voice was unmistakable. "Malik, it's not safe. Don't let them wake up." The ground beneath him shifted again. And then the first hand reached up from the sand. The hand was too large. Malik stepped back instinctively, weapon raised, but he didn't fire. Not yet. The fingers that emerged were thick, calloused, too perfectly preserved to be human remains. They flexed, curling into the sand as if feeling it for the first time in centuries. The sheer size, each digit twice as thick as his own wrist, sent something primal clawing at the back of his mind. Then another hand broke the surface. And another. The sand shifted as figures began pulling themselves free, bodies rising from the depths as if the desert itself had been keeping them buried. Their skin was dark, weathered, but unblemished by decay. Their faces, broad, strong-jawed, with heavy brows, were human but not quite. Their eyes, black, bottomless, reflecting nothing. A scream rang out from the perimeter. One of the Bravo team soldiers had opened fire. The muzzle flash illuminated the nearest figure as the bullet struck center mass. Nothing happened. The creature turned slowly, as if noticing the gunman for the first time. Then it moved. Not rushed. Not panicked. Deliberate. The soldier screamed again, but it wasn't in pain. His rifle slipped from his hands, and he staggered back, clutching his head. Malik saw the moment his mind shattered. The man's body convulsed once, then he straightened, eyes unfocused, mouth parting as if hearing something the rest of them couldn't. His breath hitched. Then, in the same distorted voice Malik had heard over the radio, he whispered, "Don't let them wake up." And then he turned his weapon on his own squad. Chaos erupted. Gunfire. Shouting. More figures emerging from the sand. Malik barely had time to react before the vibrations in the ground intensified. A tremor rolled through the desert, and the sinkhole expanded, widening. The sand collapsed inward, revealing something deeper below. Stone. Carved. A temple. Symbols ran across its exposed surface, ancient Egyptian, but wrong. The figures depicted weren't human. They were taller, broader, carved with unnatural precision. And at the center of the mural was a single image that sent ice through Malik's veins. A figure identical to the ones climbing out of the sand, standing over a battlefield of broken human bodies. And above them, above all of them, a shadow, faceless and vast, descending from the sky. Malik barely had time to register what it meant before the last of the sand collapsed beneath his feet, and he was falling, plummeting into the dark below. Malik hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs, his rifle skittering out of reach across the stone floor. Above him, the last slivers of light from the desert sky were already vanishing as more sand poured into the widening abyss. He wasn't alone. Around him, figures moved in the darkness, too many. Their breathing was deep, steady, inhumanly calm. The gunfire from above had stopped, but whether that meant Bravo Team had won or lost, he had no way of knowing. His radio crackled. Static. Then, Malik, it's not safe. His brother's voice again. He scrambled for his flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the dust, revealing the massive chamber he had fallen into. The carvings on the walls were impossibly detailed, each telling a story older than history itself. He recognized some symbols, early Egyptian script, but intermixed with something else, something alien. At the center of the chamber stood an altar. It was old, far older than any civilization Malik had ever studied. The stone was black, polished, untouched by time. And on top of it lay a single, desiccated figure. Taller than the rest. Bigger. More perfect. Unlike the others, this one hadn't risen. Not yet. Malik's flashlight flickered. Then the whispers began. Not through the radio. Not from the figures shifting in the darkness. From inside his own head. They spoke in no language he knew, but he understood all the same. A warning. A threat. A memory. The first people were not us. They were greater. Stronger. Disease did not touch them. Time did not break them. But they were not alone. Something had come for them. Something greater still. And it had buried them here, not as a mercy. As a prison. And now the prison was open. Malik stepped back. His mind screamed at him to move, to run, to get out, but his body was frozen in place. The whispers turned to a single, unbroken sound, vibrating in his skull like a tuning fork pressed against bone. The figure on the altar stirred. Malik's breath hitched. His legs finally obeyed, and he turned to flee. Too late. The figure's eyes snapped open. And for the first time in 100,000 years, the first humans returned. The chamber shook. Malik stumbled as a pulse of energy rippled outward from the altar. It wasn't a sound, more like a pressure in the air, a force that pushed against his bones, made his vision blur at the edges. The figures surrounding him, those who had risen, froze in place, as if waiting. Then the one on the altar breathed. It was slow, deep, deliberate, and then it moved. Not like a corpse reanimating. Not like a relic of history struggling back to life. No, like something waking up from a very, very long sleep. Malik forced his feet to move, stumbling backward, but the first human, the real first human, turned its head toward him. Its eyes were black, reflective, like polished obsidian, drinking in the dim light of his flashlight. And then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, inside his mind. "You are not us," Malik gasped, gripping the sides of his head. The words weren't just heard, they unraveled inside him, filling him with meaning he didn't want to understand. Images flickered behind his eyes. War. Fire. The sky burning. A race of giants standing over the earth, rulers of a world unbroken by time. And then the others. Not human. Not even from here. Something else. Something that had descended from the sky with shapes too vast to comprehend. The first humans had fought. And they had lost. They had been strong, too strong. Their disease-resistant bodies, their near immortality, it wasn't an advantage. It was a threat. So they were erased. Buried. Sealed. Their civilization struck from time itself. And now, after 100,000 years, they were waking up. The first human rose from the altar, standing to its full height. Even hunched, it towered over Malik, its frame thick with muscle, its skin unblemished by age. More were rising. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. Malik's radio crackled. A new voice. A whisper but layered. As if many were speaking at once. You should not have come here. Malik turned, heart hammering. The carvings on the walls shifted. Not eroded, changing. Symbols moved, stone writhing under some unseen force. New images took their place. One of them, a new one. Humans. Modern humans. Standing where the first ones once stood. And above them? The same shadows that came before. A new war. A second extinction. Malik's breath hitched. And then the first human smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of something that had waited a long, long time. Let us see, the voice in his head whispered. If you are stronger than us. The first human moved, and the chamber trembled in response. Malik ran. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to get out, but there was no clear path to escape. Around him, the first humans were still rising, bodies cracking as if shaking off eons of stillness. Their eyes locked onto him, not with curiosity, but with recognition. They knew what he was. They knew what had replaced them. Malik's radio crackled again, the voices from above distorted by static. Bravo team, pull back. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Gunfire erupted from above. The soldiers had ignored the order. And then, from deep within the temple, something answered the gunfire. A sound. Not like anything Malik had ever heard before. Not a roar. Not a scream. A vibration. It resonated through his bones, a deep frequency that sent nausea rolling through his stomach. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. He clutched his skull, trying to force the sound out, but it wasn't coming from the air. It was inside his head. The first human on the altar stepped forward. Malik scrambled backward, his boots slipping against the stone. He landed hard, pain jolting up his spine, but his eyes stayed locked on the figure before him. The first human raised a hand. Not in attack. In judgment. Malik's mind exploded with images. Not just memories. Histories. The first humans were not a myth. They were not a lost civilization. They were the foundation. Before Egypt. Before Sumer. Before anything we had ever built, they had ruled. They had shaped mountains, tamed rivers, harnessed the earth itself. And they had been watched. Malik's breath came in sharp gasps. The images kept coming faster, clearer. They had built cities, not of stone, but of something else, something more advanced than anything modern humanity had ever touched. They had raised monoliths that stretched toward the sky, not as temples, but as barriers. They had been trying to keep something out. And they had failed. Malik's vision swam. The last memory flashed through his mind, the sky breaking open. Shapes descending, vast, formless, watching. The first humans had fought. Their greatest warriors had held the line. And then, the whispering returned. But this time, it wasn't from the first humans. It was from something else. Something still watching. Still waiting. The first human in front of Malik tilted its head, as if listening to the same voice. And then it looked up. Malik followed its gaze, throat dry. The ceiling of the temple, the carved stone overhead, it was moving. No, not moving. Dissolving. Something above the desert had noticed them. And it was coming back. The extinction that wiped out the first humans wasn't over. It had just been waiting for the next species to grow strong enough. And now it was time to see if modern humanity would last any longer than the first. The first human exhaled, a slow, measured breath that made the air itself feel heavier. Malik pressed his hands against his ears, but it didn't help. The vibrations, no, the voices, were inside him now, layered whispers that came from something unseen, something watching. The others had noticed too. The first humans, those that had risen from the sands, all turned their heads toward the ceiling, toward the sky that wasn't visible, but somehow still felt closer. And then, in perfect unison, they knelt. Malik's stomach twisted. Not out of submission. Not out of reverence. They were bracing for war. The first human before him, the one who had woken first, the leader, the last of the true rulers of Earth, placed a massive hand against Malik's chest. The touch sent a shock through him. like static electricity but deeper. His vision blurred, and for a brief second he felt himself elsewhere. The battlefield. The ancient war. The other species descending. The endless fight, the final desperate stand. The last of the first humans choosing to be buried alive rather than conquered. And now, the same presence had returned. The first human spoke, but not in words. Not in any sound Malik could hear with his ears. It spoke through him. They have come for you, as they came for us. Malik swallowed hard, his pulse hammering. Who? He croaked. The first human grinned. Not with kindness. Not with cruelty. With understanding. Your destroyers. A soundless pulse of energy radiated through the chamber, and Malik was thrown backward. The temple cracked. The stone carvings along the walls twisted, reforming, becoming something new. Malik's eyes went wide. The new images weren't of the first humans anymore. They were of us. Modern humanity. Cities. Skyscrapers. Machines. And above them, looming like an open wound in the sky, the same vast, formless shadows that had wiped out the first civilization. Malik's radio came to life with a high-pitched screech. Then, Eagle 1 to ground team, pull back. We have. The transmission cut out. Above them, something pierced the sky. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't anything Malik could name. But it was coming. The first humans had lost. Now it was our turn. The sky split open. Not with light, not with fire, with absence. A void, a wound in reality itself, unfurled above the desert, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. The temperature plummeted. The wind stopped. Time itself seemed to pause. And then the first sound came. Not an explosion. Not a roar. A hum. Deep, resonant, vibrating through the bones of the world. Malik clutched his chest as a sudden pressure squeezed the air from his lungs. Around him, the first humans didn't flinch. They had heard this before. They had lived this moment once before. And they had lost. He turned his head, forcing himself to move, to think. His team, his people, were still up there fighting, not knowing what they were fighting. He had to get out. He had to warn them. But the leader of the first humans, the one who had touched him, who had shown him the truth, grabbed his arm. Malik struggled, but the grip was like iron. Let me go, he gasped. The first human didn't. Instead, its voice, a voice not meant for human ears, echoed inside Malik's skull. If you run, you will die. Malik shook his head violently. If I stay, I'll die too. The first human smiled. Then let us see if you deserve to live. The hum from above deepened, and suddenly, the first attack came. A streak of darkness, like liquid shadow, lashed down from the sky, carving through the sand dunes like a hot knife through wax. It didn't explode. It didn't burn. It erased. Everything it touched simply ceased to exist. Malik felt something deep in his gut, pure primal fear. He had faced death before. He had seen war, famine, the worst things human nature could throw at itself. This was different. This wasn't destruction. This was correction. A systematic erasure of an error. Humanity. He felt something pulling at his mind, an instinct as old as fear itself. Run. Hide. Beg. But then another instinct surfaced. One buried deep in his DNA, in the bones of every person who had ever struggled, ever fought, ever survived. And for the first time, Malik understood. The first humans hadn't lost because they were weak. They had lost because they had fought alone. He turned back to the first human leader. How did you fight them? The leader's expression shifted. For the first time, it looked curious. Malik stepped closer, daring to meet its black, endless eyes. How did you fight them? He repeated. The first human glanced up toward the sky, toward the returning enemy. Then it spoke. With fire. And then it opened its mouth wider than should have been possible. A deep, guttural howl erupted from its throat. A call. And from the darkness of the tomb, from deep within the sands of the Sahara, the rest of them answered. The first humans had been waiting for this moment. And now? Now they were ready. Humanity wasn't the first species on Earth. But we would be the first to finish the war.